So as we move on to muscle, we're going to discuss the different types. So if you have type 1 fibers, those are going to be your slow twitch fibers, your tonic muscles. These muscles were built more for endurance, so they're going to be more of your postural muscles. They're going to control stability and control. Your type 2 muscles are your fast twitch, basic muscles. They're usually found in the larger limb muscles. They're going to be more of your power muscles. They're going to be responsible for those quick, powerful movements, but they're less fatigue resistant, so they can't work for long periods of time. So when we're considering dosing for muscles, we want to try and decide what our goal is. So is our goal coordination? If so, you're going to use high reps, around 10 to 15% of your 1 rep max. If you're going more for endurance, so it's still high repetitions, but we're working more into that 60% of 1 rep max. For actual strength, so if you're going for like hypertrophy type strength, we're going to be looking at heavier resistance and lower repetitions. And then also with power, we're going to add that element of speed in there, lighter resistance initially, and kind of working through that as the patient progresses. So we're going to move into talking about different phases of injury. So when we're thinking of the acute phase, obviously we want to control pain during this time. We're working on increasing the range of motion, activating that motor recruitment, and we want to modify exercises during this time period if there's any irritation that occurs, because this is your highly irritable patient. So we don't want to increase that irritation. We want to try and keep that at a minimum during this phase. So we're looking more at 20 to 40% of your 1 rep max, or if you're looking at the RPE scale, this is going to be more of the 1 to 2 rating on that scale. And again, multiple sets throughout the day in order to gain that coordination and motor recruitment. So moving into the subacute phase, we're still optimizing range of motion at this point, but we're starting to regain strength and motor control through range of motion. We're starting to initiate proprioception during this phase, and this person will more than likely have that delayed onset muscle soreness, but lasting no more than 24 to 48 hours. So with your range of motion exercises, we're looking at high repetitions, so about 20 to 30, 50 to 60% of that 1 rep max, or 2 to 4 out of a 10 on the RPE scale. With strengthening exercises, again, we're focusing more on strength and endurance during this phase, not necessarily hypertrophy strength. So that's mid-range. We're going for 15 to 20 reps, 50 to 70% of that 1 rep max, or a 2 to 5 out of 10 on the RPE scale. So moving into the functional performance phase, this is kind of that end game phase, wanting to get the patient back to their desired level of function. So we've got full range of motion at this point, but we're improving their strength and endurance and advancing those proprioceptive exercises. And we want to restore their normal functional skills at this point. So if the patient wants to get back to a specific activity, then this is the phase in which we're going to do that for them. If we're increasing strength, we're looking at 60 to 75% of the 1 rep max, or a 4 to 6 out of 10 rating on the scale. Now the skill enhancement phase, these are going to be for your higher level patients, your athletes, your workers that have to do a lot of heavier lifting or repetitive activity. So again, we want to normalize that performance for them with activity-specific exercises. We're going for more strength, actual power strength, or hypertrophy strength. So we're going 70 to 90% of that 1 rep max, or 5 to 9 out of 10 on the RPE scale. So moving into discussing the Holton curve, this is where we're going to decide where our goal, or what our goal for therapy is. And let's say we want to dose for vascularity. So this isn't on the diagram written out, but that falls in that 30 repetition range. So that's going to be right at the bottom of your curve there if you're dosing for vascularity. What about endurance and coordination? Then we're going to be more in that 22 to 25 range. If we're going more for strength, so that actual hypertrophy strength, then we need to consider lower repetitions, but at that higher intensity level. And if we're going for more motor recruitment, then again, that's higher reps and a lot less intense than that range for hypertrophy. So obviously you can see that this would be a challenge to use in the clinic for various reasons. So I'm not necessarily going to calculate the patient's 1 rep max because this can get really time consuming in a busy clinic, and it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to do this because you might have a post-op patient, or you might have a patient that's just having a lot of pain, and it's just not appropriate to test for their 1 rep max. So another option for us is to look at the rate of perceived exertion scale. So I like this because it's more applicable in the clinic. And so on this scale, we're asking the patient how easy or how difficult is the activity. If you have a patient who rates an exercise a 7 out of 10 on the RPE scale and you're dosing for endurance, and you need them to be able to get to 25 repetitions, then it's possible that the exercise you've given them is too hard, and something about the exercise needs to change in order for you to get the desired result out of that exercise. Now, because I think this is kind of busy and a little bit hard to read, I do like this next chart, and I use this a lot in the clinic. And so this combines both the Holton curve and the RPE scale, and it's just really easy to kind of look across the columns and see what your goal is here. So if you're looking at, again, the left-hand side of this chart, you've got strength and power. So again, that's going to be those lower repetitions, higher intensity exercises, and the patient should be rating those exercises a 7 to 10 on the RPE scale. If we're looking for endurance and speed, higher intensity, 10 to 12 reps, somewhere between 4 and 6 on the RPE scale, whereas lower intensity endurance type exercises, those are going to be your 20 to 25 reps, 0 to 3 rating on the RPE scale. But again, vascularity isn't included on this chart, but that's going to be more in your range of 30 repetitions, and that's going to be somewhere between 0 to 1 on the RPE scale when they're rating it. So again, very, very low on that scale for vascularity. And so as far as in the clinic setting, this is a little bit more applicable to being able to use this and apply it to your patients that you have in daily clinic life. So what if an exercise is too hard? Something that I hear a lot in the clinic is the patient's exercising and they say something like, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to 20 reps. The answer to this is not to say, okay, well, let's do 2 sets of 10. Because at that point, you've changed the whole goal of the exercise. So if the exercise is too hard and they have to break it down into 2 sets of 10, well, now instead of dosing for endurance, now we're dosing more for strength, the hypertrophy type of strength. So something about that exercise is too hard. And what we need to do is we need to consider changing something about the exercise to make that achievable for the patient and to make sure that our goals are being met with our dosing. So we want to consider changing potentially the orientation of gravity. Different ways to do that. Obviously, you can use a pulley system to unload the patient. You can also just change the patient position. So let's say the patient's performing a side-lying hip abduction exercise. It's too hard. They can stand up. They can go supine. Or again, you can support them in some type of way, maybe a pulley, just maybe manual support. You can change resistance, speed, or even the range of motion, but depending on what your goal is, obviously you don't want to limit that range if mobility is the goal. All right, guys, so I know that this is a lot to take in, and therapeutic exercise principles, it's a whole separate class within itself, but the point of this is to start to get you thinking about why you're doing what you're doing and challenge your clinical reasoning abilities. We're expected to be experts in our field, so if you give every patient the same exercise or the same dosing, you aren't really providing a skilled service and you're doing a disservice to your patient. So I want you to challenge yourself moving forward to think about your dosing, what your goal is with each exercise, and the patient's going to value this more if you know that you're tailoring their program specifically to them and what they need. And you can promote a lot of good patient buy-in, especially with education about this, and allow them to be more successful in the clinic. So again, I know this is a lot of information, so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have in class or via email. And thank you for listening to this screencast. I appreciate it.